All right. It is good for me to be with you tonight, and I actually have the rare pleasure of having my wife Beth make this trip with me. From time to time I have to make a lot of trips alone, but she's with me for this one, and we're very glad to be with you here at Fairview. I want to thank the elders here for allowing me this time on a Wednesday night to come and to talk to you about a new work that we have begun at the Ironaton congregation where I labor. And I know I just told Brother Matt Rebelski, I feel like I'm disrupting everything, all of our classes and everything. I've already told Brandon I was sorry for stopping his teaching on Colossians for this week, but I am truly grateful to be allowed this opportunity. As you know, disasters are a part of life. That's sad to say, but that's just the way it is. Ever since Genesis chapter 3, man has been living in a fallen creation, a fallen world. And the entrance of sin into this world has impacted life as we know it ever since. And that includes the catastrophes and the disasters that are common to the human family. We know this from time to time, and particularly here in the Southeast, we're very familiar with tornadoes especially. And as you get down toward the Gulf Coast, hurricanes and things of that nature. Well, toward the end of last year, the end of 2018, our elders at Ironaton were approached by at least one of our deacons, and I think maybe one or two other men, who came to our elders wanting to know if they would oversee a disaster response team. And our elders discussed it, they looked at it, they talked to Brother Philip Gallagher, who is the deacon that basically heads up this work for us under their oversight, and they ultimately agreed. They told Philip, they'll say, look, if you'll take it and run with it under our oversight, then we'll do it. And Philip had a heart and a mind to do that, and so the disaster response team of the Ironaton Church of Christ began. I'm not going to try to read all of these things off, but long story short, we're all familiar, I'm sure, with Hurricane Michael that struck the Gulf Coast October 10th of last year. Beth and I were in McMinnville, Tennessee that week. We were at the Central Congregation holding a gospel meeting, and at that time our son Cade was living in Mexico Beach, Florida. He was living in the very place where Hurricane Michael would make landfall. Thankfully, that weekend, Cade had come home to Munford, Alabama. As I said, Beth and I were up in Tennessee, but Cade came home, and on Monday of that week, he had started driving back toward the Gulf Coast. This is 2 days before the hurricane made landfall. And I remember talking with Cade on the cell phone as he got close to Wetumpka, Alabama. And many of you know that Wetumpka is basically in the Montgomery area. And thankfully he decided right then and there to turn it around and to come back home instead of going down to the coast. And I am so thankful that he did, because if you're familiar with what happened, you know how devastating Hurricane Michael was to the Gulf Coast. Here's a little statement about our mission. That hurricane itself, and our having a member, or at least a former member from Ironaton down there, my son, that was the impetus we needed. That was the catalyst we needed for us to get this team going, to start this new work. Our mission is to partner with faithful congregations in areas that have been impacted by disasters. Most notably, hitherto, we've worked probably, since its inception, we've probably worked 4 to 6 disasters, and all of them have basically been tornadoes except for Hurricane Michael. And so hurricanes and tornadoes are the bulk of what we address. But in the future, there may be opportunities regarding wildfires. You remember a few years ago that terrible fire went through the Gatlinburg area. Other disasters might come in under our scope in the future, but predominantly we deal with the aftermath of tornadoes and hurricanes. We want to partner with local congregations of the Lord's people to try to be a shining light to the lives of those who have been so devastated in the wake of these storms or these disasters. All right, let's begin with where it all started, October 10th, 2018. In some of these slides, you might notice this building. This is actually the church building for the Church of Christ at the Beaches. That's technically the name of the congregation. The Church of Christ at the Beaches. It became known in the aftermath following Hurricane Michael, it became known as the Church Under the Bridge. And that's how people in the northwest Florida area surrounding the impact of Hurricane Michael, that's how they came to know this little congregation, the Church Under the Bridge. Now, at that point in time, this is where my son was worshiping. In fact, he was living in a travel trailer behind that building. You can't see it here, but he was worshiping there. And this is a congregation of only about, at most, 30, maybe 35 people. And yet, when this is all said and done, the Lord's people at this location are much more known throughout the area. And what they're known for is good. They're known for good now. And we're very thankful for that effect following the storm. I'm not going to read all of these things. I know that you can read as well as I, but if you didn't realize how terrible Hurricane Michael was, it's beyond description. It's beyond anything that I can stand up here tonight and adequately convey to you. This mentions it as a Category 4 hurricane. Now, since it's over, there have been some sources indicated that it may have actually been a Category 5, the strongest designation that you can attach to a hurricane. One thing I will draw your attention to, notice here in describing the damage, the $5 billion in agriculture and timber. Perhaps some of you, I don't know, raise your hand if any of you went to the Gulf Coast following Hurricane Michael, if any of you went to Ground Zero. Okay. All right, well, I can describe something for you that you've maybe never seen. It was strange. The moment you crossed the Alabama-Florida line, almost as soon as you crossed the line below Dothan, Alabama, going into northern Florida, you started seeing the occasional tree down. You started seeing scraps of tin lying on the sides of the road. You started seeing small damage almost immediately. But then, as you got inland, that is inland in the state of Florida, and you got closer and closer to the city of Marianna, you soon realized that virtually all the pine trees were down. And most of them were down at what I would call a 45-degree angle. They might be broken off somewhere between 15 or 20 feet up, and then just broken and laid down at a 45-degree angle. And as you go down this stretch of road, all of the trees might be pointed one way, broken in that angle and laid that away. But then you go a few more miles down the road, and now the trees are laying a different way. But to say that it devastated the timber industry in that part of Florida is an understatement. It demolished the timber industry in that part of Florida. And not only that, I can actually say that I have seen it snow in Florida. Not literally, but there would be places, in fact, there may be a picture in some of these slides, there would be places where cotton that had been harvested, cotton had been baled in those huge, I'm not talking about the round bales, I'm talking about the huge rectangular bales, and they would just be demolished. And cotton would be everywhere down the sides of the road, and it would look like it had snowed in that area. This right here is a sample of some of the damage. This isn't on the coast. Okay? This is 50 miles inland from the coast. This is in the town of Marianna, which is still yet a long ways from the coast of Florida. As you travel that road, I think it's 73, maybe 73 or 71 from Marianna on down to Mexico Beach, this just became commonplace. I mean, this is just typical of what you would see traveling through there. Notice this van here has been demolished by the large hardwood tree. Houses completely destroyed. Here's an Ace hardware store in Weewha-Hitchcock. If you're familiar with that area, nobody down there calls it Weewha-Hitchcock. That's Weewha. That's the town of Weewha. And this Ace was significant because when the recovery efforts were just beginning to get off the ground, this is one place that if you could make it to this store, they would open. And they would try to sell you what you needed for your recovery efforts. Now, what you can't tell here is that this store had no back. The back was gone. The back had been destroyed. But the front, rather than what you see right here at the roof, you can tell it sustained damage. And you can go in the front store maybe the first 20 or so feet, and you can pretty well tell it's a hardware store. And then after that, the back of it's just gone. And just debris everywhere and destruction. And yet they were opening, and they were trying to do what they could to help the people. The church under the bridge, the Lord's people at the beaches there, the congregation we're working with, they became so well known and had such a good reputation at this hardware that on one occasion I needed a special adapter. And I don't know enough about it to tell you what it was, but I needed a special adapter that fit into a generator that we could use to get some stuff done. And there had already been a run on those adapters. And when I told the lady behind the counter that I was with the church under the bridge, she kind of looked like this and like that, and she reached up under the counter and she pulled it out and she said, don't say anything about this. And she sold me one. And so that let me know right then and right there that the Lord's people had already been making an impact before I ever got down there, and that they were already known for the good work that they were trying to do in the wake of this disaster. Not uncommon at all to see things like that. Imagine the wind speed and the sheer power that would drive a piece of tin like that into a pine tree. And oh, by the way, when I told you all the pine trees are laid down kind of like this one had got caught on something. The only reason it wasn't down lower. I'm not talking about pine trees like this. They're down too. But pine trees like this could be down. And it was just devastating everywhere we went. Now this is down more on the coast. This is actually probably either in, I believe this was in Mexico Beach itself. The destruction in Mexico Beach was catastrophic. Port St. Joe, which is next door to Mexico Beach, it sustained serious damage, but really nothing to the extent that Mexico Beach did. And you would have entire homes that previous to the storm would be on the south side of Highway 98, and then following the hurricane, those houses or their rooftops were sitting across Highway 98, completely on the other side of the road, and that, of course, would be due to the force of the hurricane winds. Here's another picture, once again, in Mexico Beach, Florida. This could go on and on and on. We could show you pictures like that all night long. These signs were not uncommon. You loot, we shoot. At times, there were problems down there following this devastation. There were problems of some criminal activity, and the people were desperate. Many of them were desperate, and not only the ones who perhaps were stealing were desperate, but the ones who were just trying to hold on. They're just trying to keep what little they have preserved. They're just trying to hold on to life. And so you see signs like this, you loot and we shoot. I don't know how clear that is for those of you toward the back or from any of these angles, but on the road behind the church building, where I showed you on the beginning slides, on that road behind them, there began being the piling site for all the debris. They would bring the debris inland about 5 or 6 miles where the church building was located, and they were starting to cover up this empty vacant lot. And it's just monumental. It's mountainous how much debris they had to bring in just to pile up and burn what they could, and what they couldn't burn would have to be hauled off to other locations. Now, if you're coming over the bridge, crossing the intercoastal waterway, you're looking down here on the church building for the Lord's people at the beaches. The Church of Christ at the beaches. There's the shot. See what I mean about the 45 degrees? You can see that on the pine trees. And those are not little pines. Those are mature pines that were behind the building. Basically, the only damage. Now, we always want to speculate whether or not this was providential. And I'll just be like the Apostle Paul. I'll say perhaps. Perhaps this was providential. But the only damage really sustained by the Lord's people in this building, they had bought this building from another group, and it came with a steeple. Well, the steeple's been removed. It was removed naturally. Compliments of Hurricane Michael. And then there was a little bit more damage in the back here, I think concerning maybe where some ductwork went in the building from the heating and air units. But rather than that, the building was preserved. And it turned out to be a great blessing, because this became the point for helping the community. All these trees, this lowland, swampy-looking area that surrounds the church, people lived out in there. They were living out in there before the storm. The only difference is many of them, after the storm, kept living out in there in tents. They were living out in these swamps in tents. And so for them to be able to make it to the church building here and to have a rallying point where they could come and get a hot meal, later on, once they got it set up, they could come and have a hot shower. Just little things in life that you and I would do it every day, we would take for granted. But in the aftermath of this storm, these people needed those things. And our brethren, the Lord's people, were there. And they were doing what they could do to provide help and relief. This basically is the congregation. I said at most 30 or 35. That might have been pretty generous. I don't know if they're really that big there at the beaches. But that's pretty much the nucleus, the heart of that congregation out front. And they used to have an awning, or I guess you would call it an awning, or a little roof here over the front porch. But of course that too is now gone, or it was. Now, can you imagine a little church of about 30 people having this for a worship service? In the recovery, Sunday after Sunday there for a while, this is what their Sunday morning services look like. Okay? I can't tell you how many non-Christians, non-members, heard the true gospel. The unadulterated, simple New Testament gospel of Christ. I can't tell you how many of them heard it for the first time in their lives. Because as a result of this hurricane, and as a result of the relief efforts that the Lord's people were carrying out at that time, people in the community were ready to listen. They were ready to come. And so it was just wonderful for that little church to be filled, a church that had not been filled, if ever, had not been filled like that for years and decades. And yet during this storm, people wanted to come and hear the gospel. During the course of that effort, there were many stages that went to it, but quite early on, one of their members down there was able to secure some pods, storage units, or things of that nature. And so they were brought on site here. This is right to the right of the church building. This shadow right here is off of the church building. And so out in the parking lot, they had these pods brought in. We were able to use those for storage. As you can see, here's a trailer being unloaded, and it's being put right into those pods as needed. Now, those are 3 members of our team right there from Ironaton. If you can see this is Brother Cody Taylor, this is Brother Cohen Davidson, and this is Brother Mike Hayes. All 3 of them are from Ironaton, but there were so many people working in this effort from so many different congregations over the span of weeks, several weeks, that the relief efforts were going on. There's an example of just some of the bottled water that was donated and that was brought. Their fellowship hall became a makeshift pantry. This was the fellowship hall in that little church building, and it turned into a makeshift pantry. You can just see this food was coming in from really all over the brotherhood, especially all over the southeast. It started out, the bleed over, once the pantry was filled, we had to take the left side of the auditorium for a while. And you could have anything from canned goods to bread to diapers. You can see on this side wall, you can see Clorox wipes and so many things that would be needed in an ongoing cleanup effort. Well, it got to the point that the Lord's people at the beaches were trying to provide, in the beginning, at least one hot meal a day. They started out doing that. And then it got to where they were doing at least 2 hot meals a day. They would serve breakfast. And I think at the height of it, I'm not totally sure on this, but I think at one point they might have even gone to serving 3 meals a day. Breakfast, lunch, and supper for people right there in the community whose homes still did not have power. Some of them, in many instances, still did not have drinking water that they could trust coming into their homes. And so you can see how these canopies and these tents, and there's even a trailer, I think, with a huge grill on it or a huge roaster on it. This was brought down and the work began. And people started receiving some much-needed meals. And not only that, some much-needed attention. They just needed to know that somebody was there for them when their lives had been turned upside down. Here's a man here, Wayne is his first name. He lived right across the road from the church building. Had lived right across the road from the church building, who knows how many years. And had never darkened the door of any of the church services that anyone could remember. Well, he's got a front row seat to all of this work. He's living right across the road, seeing what the Lord's people are doing, day in and day out. And you know what? He became a part of this endeavor. He wanted to come help. He wanted to do what he could to contribute to the effort. And it got to where Wayne was there at every service. Okay? And I haven't heard, I don't know whether Wayne has ever obeyed the gospel, but I do know this. I know this. I know that he heard the truth. I know that he had the opportunity and that he heard the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's something that we hope seeds have been planted. He was a mechanic of sorts by trade. This was his workshop right here before our team came down and others came down to help. And then this is his workshop afterwards. And that was really critical to the relief effort because he did a lot with chainsaws. And so people from all in this area needed their chainsaws repaired from time to time from all of the work they were doing. And they came to Wayne, and Wayne didn't have a shop. Well, he didn't have a shop for a while. But soon thereafter he did. And that was an important thing to get done. At one point, team members and relief volunteers, at one point they realized that they were going to have to leave the building because some of the people were not coming out for a couple of reasons. Number one, with so many pine trees down, a lot of the roads were cut off. And so the people couldn't get out. They literally couldn't get out of their homes or their yards unless they left on foot. Number two, a lot of people were not comfortable doing that because they were afraid of looters. They were afraid that if they left what they had left of a home and came to the building to get hot meals or to get supplies, that somebody would come in and loot and steal what little they had. And so at one point we started sending out teams. Okay, they would load up on the back of a pickup truck. They would put all kinds of flats of bottled water. They would put shaving and personal hygiene supplies and even meals in those little clamshell packets, where you send meals and so forth. And we would go out, our teams would go out into these swamps and into these pine forests that had been leveled, and they would find people, sometimes people living in tents, and they would be able to give them some of the needed supplies and some of the needed food. There's 3 on one such outing there. This was a disabled veteran that was living out of his truck. He's living between that truck and that tent right there. That's where he lived. And the reason was he had a daughter down there that was 8.5 months pregnant. Now, I'm not the best at math, but I know that 8.5 months pregnant's close. You're not very far from having that baby. And he had let his daughter have his camper, and he was staying there out front just trying to make sure that nobody came and stole anything. This is another instance of a seed sown. I don't know what will be the final outcome of this young man's life, but Juan lived about 2 houses behind the church building down the road. Prior to the hurricane, had never darkened the doors. His family had never darkened the doors. But Juan, this little boy, I don't know his age, I would guess him at around 10 years of age perhaps. When he saw the work that was going on, he was a lot like Wayne. He wanted to be there. He wanted to be a part. And he got to where he was coming to church, worship service, and he was hearing the truth. And like I said, this is a young man, this is a child, but if nothing else, the truth of the gospel was planted in that young heart in a most indelible way. And I just hope and pray that it bears fruit in the years to come. There's an instance of their living in the tents, like I told you. Somebody had a generator hooked up to a Christmas tree. This was their Christmas last year, 2018. They were making the most of a bad situation down there at that time. All right, now all of that was Hurricane Michael, and that's the bulk of what I had to show you. In January of this year, you might have known about the tornadoes that came through Wetumpka, Alabama. They were devastating to some of the old buildings. That's not an old building, that's a new denominational church building, and it just destroyed it in some ways from the inside out. You might can tell that by looking at that picture there. Many of these old homes would go back, they would be close to 100 or more years in age perhaps. Some of them were completely devastated, others were just rendered with a lot of damage, to say the least. Some more pictures there. Well, we coordinated with the Wetumpka Church of Christ. Like I say, that's what we want to do. We want to find a faithful congregation on site, and we want to go help do what we can to start providing some relief. That was the team we sent that Saturday morning. I think that was all of us from Ironaton. Now, just from Ironaton. But we were able to coordinate with congregations from about, well, I don't know how many, but the total effort that morning on a Saturday in January had between 50 and 60 people from all different congregations in Alabama, and some maybe outside of Alabama, that had come to this little town to provide aid and relief following that tornado. I dragged as much brush that morning as I have dragged in a long time. And there was brush everywhere to be gotten out of people's yards and off of people's houses and their work sheds. And as you can see there, we've got some chainsaw crews going. Blue tarps had to be put up where possible. A lot of cleanup. Now, the one that probably got more publicity that I know you knew about was the storms through Beauregard, Alabama, Smith Station, the Auburn area, Lee County. That also happened earlier this year. We were able to send out a team to it. I'm told that that's an actual photograph of that tornado. Okay? You know, how would you like to see that headed your way? And that's supposed to be the storm that killed how many people in Beauregard, Alabama? I forget the number, but it was a devastating storm, to say the least. Here's some pictures from that. Now, we actually made 2 trips down following this storm. We went in 2 different ways. This one here, I think, was the first one. We actually didn't do our work in Lee County, Alabama. We did our work across the state line in West Georgia, and we coordinated with the Warm Springs Road congregation there in Columbus, Georgia. And so we went into this community. You can see that this is a very nice house, and the roof has just been blown, as we say in Alabama, slap off the top of it. just devastated there. Some more. Now, this was behind a brother's house who was actually, I think, a deacon in one of the congregations in Columbus. That had been his storage shed or his work shed, and it had been blown into the woods that were behind his house. But now, as you can see, they're no longer really woods. This was very close to the actual path of the tornado here, right behind that brother's house. This is the preacher at Warm Springs Road. This is Brother Lee Snow. Some of you may know Brother Snow. That's one of our young men, again, from Ironaton right there, involved in this effort. This is a young lady that came from Warm Springs Road. I can't remember her name, but she worked as hard as any of us men out there that day as we were trying to help this brother clean up around his house. At this point, we had been able to secure a trailer for the team. You might have noticed that trailer in one of the earlier slides. And so we were able to use it that day. And after we had worked through the morning, we were able to pull some chairs and a table off. And somebody ran back into Columbus and got McDonald's. And we're sitting there at lunch eating some Big Macs and some fries, if you will. Now, this is the same storm, Lee County, Beauregard, Smith Station, but we went back. Brother Mike Haynes, that I showed you in one of our pictures earlier, Brother Mike is retired from the state of Alabama, and when he retired, he was the Deputy State Fire Marshal for the state of Alabama. Well, he's on our team, and he's one of our faithful members there at Ironaton. And he coordinated with a fire department right in Smith Station. He was able to make a contact and to pull a few strings and get a few things done. And so we were able to bring the trailer down and the grilling and all the necessary equipment to feed people. And on this day here we are grilling the burgers and hot dogs. I'm trying to say on that day there we fed around 800 meals. Okay, around 800 meals. That's on a Saturday morning down in Smith Station, Alabama. Some more pictures of that. At one point, the mayor, and this is the mayor of Smith Station right here, he came out and he expressed his appreciation to us for coming and trying to be a part of the work and helping people during this disastrous time. All right, now this was one trip I did not make personally. I did not go to Hamilton, Mississippi. This was a spring tornado, as I recall, I think in March maybe, across the state line in eastern Mississippi. The Hamilton Church of Christ, Brother Troy McNutt, I've known Troy not well, but I've known of him for years. His son, I believe, is Brad McNutt. I've known Brad a little bit better than his father, but they're good men, good people. And this was a good congregation. We were glad to find them and to be able to coordinate with them. Here's an example of some of the damage there in Hamilton. It was bad in places. Where it got bad, it got really bad. Many of you have noticed how after a spring tornado comes through that the next day or two it's cold. You know, it's just hard, down, cold. And that was what happened here. You can maybe tell by the fog and the way the light is filtering through that there were some cold mornings there for a day or two following that tornado. They sat up there in the church parking lot. And by the way, if you notice right here, there was another congregation that had a disaster response team out of Mississippi on over toward Batesville. They came and we were all able to work together. In 3 days, we were able to feed 3,000 meals to the people right there in the Hamilton community in the name of the Lord. We were able to do this in the name of Christ as His church, His people, trying to make an impact in this community. And so, as I said, I didn't get to go be a part of this one, but I'm really thankful to know that they were able to do what they were able to do. I believe that's the last one. Now, I won't take up much more of your time, but as I told you, Brother Mike Haynes is retired with as being a Deputy State Fire Marshal, and he was real big. He says, you know what, if we're going to do this, we need training for our team members. And that only makes good sense. And so he was able to get CERT training brought to our congregation one Saturday morning earlier this year. You can see how many people showed up for the certification and the training. That took all day. That Saturday was a pretty long day. We got there, I think, about 8 o'clock in the morning, and I don't think we left till about 3:30 or 4 that afternoon. And basically, I'm supposed to know what CERT stands for. Some of you know, Community Emergency Response Training, I think, or Citizens Emergency Response Training. It's offered basically through it's under Homeland Security. It's under Homeland Security, and then another bureau under that, and they'll offer CERT training to locals. And so we were able to take advantage of that and better equip some of our members. Now, this is why I'm here tonight. And let's see, will the little class be coming back in, Brandon? The cradle roll?
Usually the bell is rung by now.
Okay. I may just go on and transition into the invitation. Is that fine? Okay. Thank you for giving me a few extra minutes, and thank you for your attention. This is basically why I'm here tonight. I'll say a few more things about that, and then we'll offer the Lord's invitation. Okay. Basically, the contacts I make wherever I'm out talking about the disaster response team is this. We need volunteers sometimes, okay? Especially if there's a hurricane. Hurricanes are a totally different animal. We've learned this. With hurricanes, you've got a lingering, ongoing relief effort, weeks and months. With tornadoes, we've learned that